Hopes for a quick resolution to the crisis in Ukraine may be fading as Russian President Vladimir Putin shuts down all high-level talks between the Kremlin and the White House. This as new sanctions from the U.S. and its allies could come as soon as Monday, despite the fact that earlier sanctions and pressure from President Obama and other world leaders have failed so far. Joining us live to talk about the stalemate, Mark Dubowitz, Executive Director of the Foundation for a Defense of Democracies. Mark, good to see you.
Hi, Arthel.
First of all, are you surprised, and where would you say the U.S. and the U.S. allies are going wrong? Because, I mean, Putin continues to be defiant, and he's playing by his own rules.
President Putin is the major domo of global power politics, and he's playing hard to get right now. He certainly has taken the measure of President Obama and this administration, and he believes that he can deal with any sanctions or any diplomatic pressure that is forthcoming. He's got his sights set on eastern Ukraine and perhaps parts of Eastern Europe, and he believes that he can move without any major pushback from the United States or the Europeans.
And Medvedev saying that it doesn't mean forever that Putin won't talk to President Obama under pressure. I mean, what is that? What does that mean?
Well, Putin, again, I mean, he's dangling the prospects of renewed diplomacy and renewed engagement, but while doing so, he's making moves to undercut Ukraine's sovereignty and using Russian special forces and pro-Russian militias to cause havoc in eastern Ukraine. So, again, Putin has taken the measure of this administration, and to be fair, he took the measure of the George W. Bush administration. Both presidents have thought that Putin was a man they could deal with, and Putin has shown them that he is a man with an agenda.
A man with his own agenda. So from your perspective, Mark, as the executive director of the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, how do you reactivate talks with Russia? And can this escalating crisis be resolved through further targeted sanctions and diplomacy alone?
Sanctions are never a silver bullet. I mean, they may be silver shrapnel. They can inflict a serious economic wound on the Russian economy. We've already seen signs of that. But sanctions cannot work in isolation. They cannot work just alongside diplomacy. There needs to be a credible threat of real military support to the Ukraine military. And NATO needs to show itself to be a serious alliance. The United States needs to stop slashing U.S. defense budgets. Putin needs to understand that we are still a great power, and when we draw red lines, we are serious about that. Unfortunately, President Obama has turned red lines into pink advisory warnings, and President Putin believes that he can move with impunity. Okay,
but when you talk about military assistance, how much power are we talking about?
Well, we need to at least show that we're willing to arm people who are willing to fight for themselves. We didn't do that in Syria 2 years ago. The Syrian people rebelled against Bashar Assad. It was a peaceful uprising. We didn't provide them with the arms that they needed to fight. And now Assad is winning with Russian and Iranian support. Again, we are trying to engage with the Iranians on their nuclear program. We've relied entirely on sanctions and diplomacy. Iran's supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, doesn't fear U.S. military might. And so we need to have coercive statecraft, which means serious sanctions, serious diplomacy, but also always the credible threat either of military force or at least arming those people who are willing to fight for themselves, for their own freedom and for their own independence.
Right. And of course, when you talk about more military force, there's some Americans saying, look, we don't want to get our men and women entangled in another war. And as I continue that thought, Ukrainian Prime Minister is saying Russia wants to start World War III. Do you believe that?
Well, again, I'm not sure if Putin wants to start World War III. I think Putin, and he may not invade Ukraine. I mean, he may just use always the threat of military force to rattle the Ukrainians and rattle our allies. And I don't think that it's an either-or. It's not a question of having American boots on the ground or having no military posture at all. I'm talking about providing military support, arms to people like the Ukrainians and others who want to defend themselves. The United States needs to send that message that we are still a serious superpower and we're willing to defend those who want to defend their own democracies and their own independence.
All right, Mark Dubowitz, I have to leave it there. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.